Welcome back to the NT Podcast, Science and Theology Podcast, the leading show in the Balkans where we explore the deep connections between reason and faith, or history and mystery. I'm your host, Nemanja Jurišić, and today we are truly honored to have with us Dr. Dale Allison, one of the world's foremost New Testament scholars, a brilliant historian, and a deep thinker on religious experience and phenomena. Professor Dale, welcome. How are you?
I'm great today. How are you?
I'm great. I'm a little tired. When you're a Saturday Adventist, you work on Friday twice as much, so
Yeah,
it's
okay.
a little different. But yeah, okay. So today's topic is about miracles and Marian apparitions and other things. So Dr. Dale will help us to unpack those mysteries. So, Dr. Dale, many viewers may have heard of the Marian apparitions, especially about the extraordinary visions at Zeitoun in Egypt. So, can you tell us more about that? What do you make of this event?
So first of all, I need to say that I approach this as a historian, first of all. So what we can say is that in 1968, one evening in Zeitoun, which is a small suburb of Cairo, and near a church known as St. Mary's, which is a Coptic Orthodox church, uh, some people looked up and they thought on the church dome at the top of the church, they saw a young woman and they thought she was going to commit suicide. So one person ran for the police, one person ran to get a priest. But at some point, they realized, given that the dome was not something that you could stand on, that this wasn't a young woman. And somebody looked up and said, well, it must be Mary. So Mary, the mother of God. And this caught on. And what is so strange is that this apparition appeared off and on throughout the next couple of years or so. And it was seen not only by Christians, but by secular people and by Muslims. It was reported in the Egyptian press at the time. And there are a couple of pictures. People can be skeptical of the pictures, but the firsthand testimony from thousands of people is really, really interesting. And so if you aren't, let's say, a Coptic Orthodox Christian, or you're not a Roman Catholic, and you don't want to say, well, this was an apparition of Mary, what do you say? My own view is that this is an enigma. I know of no rational explanation for it. I know of no reductive explanation for it. Some people have postulated maybe earthquake lights, but that doesn't fit the testimony that I've read. It also doesn't fit the photographs if the photographs are authentic. Um, what I need to stress here is that this event lasted for months and months and months. The events were witnessed by tens of thousands of people. Some people estimated that crowds occasionally were 75,000 or 100,000 for an evening. The crowds were so big that the local government cut down trees to make space for them, set up a fence. So this was a really big deal. There was also early on a church commission that was assigned to look into this and figure out what was going on. They found no signs of trickery. They found no machine in the dome. It's not clear what technology in 1968 could have done this. The city also, at one point, shut off the electrical grid to this area, and the lights were still there, so that didn't stop them. So I think that the responsible historian, this is my own view, should be able to say from time to time, this has no explanation that we have come up with. It has no there's no easy story to tell that makes you think, oh, this was just mass hysteria or it's made up, or it's a legend. It's not a legend. There were tons of people who saw this. And there are many people still alive who will tell their stories today. I had a student several years ago, a Coptic Orthodox priest, who went and talked to people here in New Jersey. These were Egyptians who were in Cairo in 69, 69, in 68, 69, and 70, and they still look back and remember these events. They themselves will talk about what it meant to them, and they'll tell you what they saw. Anyway, if you read through the testimony, I think you just scratch your head and you say, well, if that's not Mary, then what the heck is it? I think as a responsible historian, you shouldn't come up with sort of knee-jerk, easy, materialistic, reductionistic explanations, because I don't think any of them that have been forwarded so far make any sense. So I think you're stuck with, well, if you don't think it's Mary, then you have to say, well, it's something we know not what. And I, for one, am perfectly happy to do that, to say I have no mundane explanation for this. So I don't. And I think it's fascinating. It's one of the biggest miracles, I think, in history, or whatever you want to call it, because, again, the testimony to this goes back to eyewitnesses, thousands of eyewitnesses. People recorded their testimonies as it was going on, as it happened. So this is not a legend. It's some very strange modern event that the Coptic Christians and I suppose many Roman Catholics would say was Mary. But I do have to add, there was, as far as I know, no communication. That is, people saw her or this pillar of light, which, by the way, sometimes was surrounded with these little things that people thought of as doves or birds. And they would move around and she would move around. Sometimes, supposedly, she would bow a little bit. But there were no verbal communications. There are claimed healings. That is, people who went to the site would claim that they were healed. A skeptic could say, well, those are psychosomatic. But the image itself, I think, is deeply puzzling to the historian.
Thank you so much. But why don't we have something today like that? That was, I think, 50 years ago. So what
I
happened?
have no
Why don't
idea.
we see now?
I have no idea. Look, if I knew what this was, maybe I could say something, but I don't know what it was. And if you're going to be honest, if you believe in miracles, you're going to say that they're highly irregular, that they occur sometimes and not other times. It's just like when Christians will talk about prayer requests that are answered. Sometimes when people are sick, they'll pray and they'll get better and they'll attribute the healing to God. But other times they pray, most times they pray, and nothing extraordinary happens. And the Christian response to that is, well, everything's a mystery, or we don't understand, or God is inscrutable, and so on. I like those answers because they admit that we don't have the answer.
Great. And naturalists would say that this is the result of natural factors such as light reflections, steam, smoke, or even atmospheric phenomena. Or maybe I heard Earth magnetic field or something like that. So what do you think?
So no, none of those explanations fly at all. All you have to do is read the testimony. Just go read the testimony. Also, it's interesting that we have some accounts from people who aren't Christians or who aren't Muslims, and they'll say that, well, they saw something there. They're not quite sure what it was. It would come into focus and it would go out of focus. But it was irregular. It didn't seem to be timed with anything. So some evenings, I guess most evenings, nothing happened. Then some evenings, this thing, whatever it was, would appear, but you couldn't predict whether it would be early evening or midnight or 3 o'clock in the morning. I think the most concrete attempt to explain this was maybe this was earthquake lights. So sometimes when the earth is tense, it will generate an electrical current that can be seen. So sometimes before an earthquake, you'll have lightning or strange things like ball lightning. But this just doesn't fit anything. It by which I mean it doesn't fit any of the testimonies. This looks like, and it appeared to the people like a human figure, something like a statue, and it would move from place to place. It didn't go to any place else other than this church or the domes at the top of this church. Um, that's just not an explanation. So we do know a lot of things about earthquake lights. They don't manifest as visions of the Virgin Mary over a period of 2.5 years, something like that. That just doesn't work.
Right, but when we read some testimonies, maybe we can find some contradictions in description of that phenomena.
Oh yeah,
So is that
sure, you can, but that means one, people are to some extent reading things into whatever is there, but it's really there. And I don't think it's different than a police report where there's been an accident in an intersection, and people might disagree on which car entered the intersection first. Eyewitnesses frequently disagree about things. They might disagree as to who was to blame, and maybe they'll disagree about the colors of the cars, but they're all going to agree that there was an accident, right? And this is the same thing. Everybody agrees that there was some sort of really strange light phenomenon. It doesn't sound like anything else. By the way, I have a book here in my personal library, which is on strange lights and lighting phenomena, strange lightning, ball lightning, and earthquake phenomena, and so on. I've gone through the whole thing. There isn't anything that remotely sounds like this event. So it's not something that you slot in anywhere. At least I haven't been able to find the slot. Unless, of course, you want to say it was Mary, and then, that's the easy one, and then it might fit with other Marian apparitions that you believe in.
right? What about pareidolia? The human brain has a tendency to recognize patterns, especially religious or spiritual
Oh
symbols
yeah,
in everyday things. So uh, maybe
yeah,
that's it.
that's true. And people see, I often see our first president, George Washington, in the clouds. I often see horses in the clouds. I know they're not there. I know sometimes people see Jesus in the clouds. You can go on the internet and see lots of pictures of Jesus in the clouds. But again, all you have to do is go read the witnesses. This is not that. Now, you could say that it was a luminous figure, and that people read into that luminous figure what they wanted. That is, they could see something resembling a statue of Mary that they knew from their church or from their youth or from pictures. Yes, that's sensible. But all I'm talking about here is the strange fact that you have this pillar of light, which uh, appeared to almost everybody as though it was a human figure being represented in this light. So I don't think this is pareidolia. I know all about this phenomenon. In fact, I have handouts that I give to my students and tell them not to be naive about religious things. You can find Jesus on pieces of toast. You can find Jesus uh, in cooking grease. You can find Jesus everywhere. This is not like that.
Thank you for that perspective. And what about Fatima? That's even maybe bigger. I don't know.
Well,
Uh,
so I think what happened in Zeitoun is more interesting. So Fatima uh, is a place in Portugal, and this happened, gosh, 50 years before Zeitoun. And there you have a small group of children who are allegedly in communication with the Virgin Mary. But what happens, the big event there is not seeing Mary. What people said was it looked like the sun was detached from the sky and was falling to earth. Some people thought the world was about to end. Other people said that the sun danced. we do have newspaper accounts and lots of interviews later on with people who are there. Now, that one does to me have parallels in the scientific literature. That is, there are some things that are kind of like what's going on here. But even if you say that this is some sort of solar illusion or optical illusion that everybody saw, the thing that is so strange about it, to me anyway, is that this event was expected at a particular time and all the people had gathered together, so that the time that these children said something amazing would happen is exactly when it happened. So it's the timing that for me is so strange and interesting. That's a remarkable coincidence at the very least, right? So again, that one seems to me to be more easily tamed, but it's still a wild coincidence, right? That everybody's gathered, and then all of a sudden you have this strange phenomenon or vision of the sun.
Yes, almost like a prophecy or something like that.
Yeah, it's like a prophecy comes true, and Roman Catholics will talk about it in those terms, and they'll also talk about messages that were given to the children that were then handed over to authorities or hierarchs, and all the way up to the Pope. Um, so I don't know what to do with any of that. I just think it's a wild coincidence, right? It's a wild coincidence that this happens at the time something remarkable was supposed to happen. But again,
Yes.
it's the sun. It's not a picture of Mary. It's not a picture of Jesus. Uh,
Yes, thank you. And I watched a movie about Fatima. I don't know if that really happened, but some priests said to those children, like, you are demonic possessed. So is that possible to you?
So I don't like appealing to demons for things like that. So I have Protestant friends who, when you bring up Marian apparitions, bring up Zeitoun or Fatima, they'll say, well, maybe it was demons who did this. But I think that's abdicating thinking. It's really easy just to say, my stories are miracles and your stories are either legends or demonic. That doesn't involve any serious investigation. And it's also what people said to Jesus. That is, some of Jesus's opponents, according to the Gospel of Luke and Matthew and Mark, when Jesus cast out demons, they said, uh-oh, looks like he's doing this. Oh, it must be Satan. So he casts out demons by Beelzebul. I hesitate to fall back on a strategy that people used against Jesus. And I should also say that I'm just allergic to the whole Christian tradition, which is apologetical and always says, if anything strange happens outside our little circle, then it must be demonic or legendary or something. This is what Protestants did with Catholic miracles. Protestants, when they showed up in the 16th century, thought that Catholic miracles vindicated Catholic doctrine. So they had to dismiss all the Catholic miracles. And that's where you get the so-called doctrine of cessationism, which is the idea that miracles happened in the Bible, but they haven't happened anywhere else at all. That's a really hard stance to take. And the later skeptics actually just took the early Protestant skepticism towards Catholic miracles and made it cover all miracles, which you can easily do. So my preference is actually to look at accounts, read stories, look for patterns, and decide whether some of these weird, metanormal, miraculous events might have happened. I personally think that when you approach this with an open mind, you will find things like Zeitoun, and you'll say, well, I don't have an explanation for that.
Okay, and what do you think if God maybe meets people where they are? So in Catholic Church or places we have Mary, in Orthodox churches we have icons and saints. Maybe in
Uh-huh.
Protestant world we have Jesus angels or something like that. So what if God just approached the people in their context?
So I'm very liberal about that. I have no difficulty with that. I sometimes remember listening to a Hindu, and the Hindu said, God takes the shape of the container that God is poured into. And I thought, well, maybe there's something uh, to that. Look, I want God to be as gracious and universal as possible. So I want God to speak to everybody. And I like to take the saying at the end of Matthew 5, God sends the sun on the just and the unjust, makes it rain on the good and the bad. I don't see why God can't be merciful to everybody, including people who aren't Christians, and people can be healed sometimes, or strange things can happen.
I agree totally. Thank you so much. What about icons when we have examples that they cry or something like that? Do you believe that?
Yeah, so I have never investigated a crying icon. I've never seen one. Given my view of the world, I have to say that's possible. If there are such things, I would have to think a lot about what they might mean. I have read a number of stories and accounts and books, but I've never investigated this firsthand. And since I've not done so, I think it's prudent to say I just have no judgment or opinion. But it wouldn't dumbfound me or surprise me if once in a while one of these is real. Now, we do know that once in a while one of these has been fraudulent. That is, we found somebody who's playing with the icon and making the water or the tears, or making an icon bleed, that sort of thing. So you have to be very careful with this. But uh, again, I'm just going to say I don't know. I don't have an opinion, because that's not ever been a subject that sucked me in. Zeitoun sucked me in, so I've read a lot and talked to lots of people about it. Uh, bleeding and crying icons have just never got my attention in the same way.
Can you give us example of the biggest fraud in the history about miracles? Do you have any example in your head about that?
Oh yeah, well, I'm not going to remember the dates or even the church, but there was a Roman Catholic church which had a cross in it. So this would be, I think this is the second half of the 16th century, but it might be the next century. Anyway, there was a cross in a church that would bow to people, and it would look like it was alive. And this was a Catholic church, and people would come and they'd pay money to go and see the cross, which seemed to be alive and to move. And what happened is, after the Reformation, the Protestants took over the church, and they discovered that this cross had wires on it in the back, and that the people in the church had been doing this to raise money. So they had this supernatural cross, but it was a complete fraud. So uh, and the other thing is this is difficult, because I have nothing against Mormons, and I've had Mormon friends, but people who aren't Mormons they can't credit the story of an angel showing Joseph where the golden tablets were, and so on. So if you're not a Mormon, you have to see some sort of fakery at the beginning of the Mormon movement. It does. I don't think there's a. I think those are your two choices. Um, so there would be another if you're not a Mormon, but rather a certain kind. Well, I guess most people who are not Mormon would have to think that.
Okay, fascinating. Now we have examples when priests pray and the River Jordan uh, changes its direction. So, is it possible to you?
I have no idea what story you're referring to. Are you referring to something in modern times?
I don't know really, maybe a decade or something like
Okay,
that.
so
Old video I saw.
I have no idea. Oh, did you see a video of the river going backwards? Yeah,
Yes.
so I
Oh,
have no idea. Now the River Jordan today in certain areas is really small. So, I don't know what's going on, but I don't talk about things that I don't know firsthand, and this is totally new to me. So, uh, I have an I don't have an opinion. On the other hand, I have to say that my default setting is to be a bit skeptical. So, yeah, I'm a bit skeptical. I do know that rivers can run backwards. The Mississippi River ran backwards in 1812 when there was a great earthquake uh, south of St. Louis, and people saw the Mississippi River, which is our biggest river in North America. They said it ran backwards for a little bit. So I know that can happen, but what you're talking about, I have no idea.
okay, fair enough. Did you study maybe about Holy Fire at the Church of Sepulchre in Jerusalem?
Oh, yeah.
Every year there is.
So there I'm cynical. So there I'm not convinced. Yeah, I have looked into that. That still goes on every year. I don't know if your audience knows about this, but well, so every year in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, two or three hierarchs will go into the tomb and close the door, and they have a plate in front of them that has oil on it. And the idea is that to celebrate Christ's resurrection, the oil lights itself, and then they light a candle, then they exit and they go out and they light all the candles of everybody. This does have a long history. If I remember right, it's documented as far back as maybe the 8th century, something like that. Uh, and of course, there's stories among the Christians, among the Orthodox Christians, that during times when the Muslims had control of Jerusalem, they would frisk the priests and make sure, or the hierarchs, make sure that they had no flints on them or any way to fake this, but they would still come out with the fire. I don't know what the trick is, but I'm inclined to think it's a trick. And I'm inclined to say that the people who do this, now look, I'm just speculating, okay? But I don't believe in this one. I think that if you were a faithful steward of, the Greek or Armenian tradition, and you've got all these people waiting for God to do a miracle and for you to bring out the fire, it would be very difficult to come out and say, nope, God didn't light this candle. Sorry about that. We can't celebrate Easter. I think they would feel a lot of pressure, a lot of social pressure for this miracle to happen. So I'm just speculating again, and who knows, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems odd to me that God would show up every year at the same place and same time and do the same thing. So I'm a bit cynical about that one.
Great, thank you so much. Let's move to the next type of miracles. What about levitation among the saints? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, so that's one that I think happens. And I have run across a number of accounts of people thinking they levitated or people seeing others levitate in purely social context, in purely secular context. But as it happens, levitation is associated primarily with holy people, whether those are Tibetan holy people or Christian saints. In the Catholic tradition, you have tons of testimony given at depositions for canonization of a saint that so and so saw this individual levitate. These are really common, and the testimony, for example, to someone like Teresa of Avila is pretty good. You have people who swore after her death that they saw her levitate. There are stories about her levitating in churches, in services publicly, and She was embarrassed by this, asked God to stop it. She writes about this in her journal or diary, and she doesn't like it and she wants it to stop. It's really hard for me to think that Teresa just made all this up. I'm inclined to think that this happened, but the best case can be made for somebody a century later, a guy named Joseph of Cupertino, who was an Italian priest, and his levitations were allegedly witnessed over a period of several decades by hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people. The church moved him around because he was a sort of public sensation. That is, people wanted to go see the guy who could fly or the guy who could get off the ground, and they didn't want the bother. He himself seems to have been a rather simple person, not astute theologically, but very, very devout and very strange. And I'm inclined to think, given the testimony, that he did sometimes leave the ground. By the way, there were Protestants who saw this and converted to Catholicism. I would not convert to Catholicism if I saw this. I would think, wow, that's very interesting. Maybe this is, a human potential, usually unrealized, and a very strange people who get themselves into a certain mental state, they rise off the ground. I don't know, but the testimony for Joseph's levitations are robust, and if you had this much testimony for anything unremarkable, nobody would have any doubts. It's not one person or two people or three people, it's hundreds of people. And the fellow who took the depositions for the canonization process, I can't remember how many of these he did, but he just quit at some point. Everybody says they saw him fly. They're all just telling me the same story. What's the point of getting 200 as opposed to 100 or whatever the number was? So there's a historian of the Reformation, Carlos Eyre, who's written a book recently called They Flew. And there's a chapter on Joseph of Cupertino, and he shows himself open to remarkable possibilities. Again, I think one of our problems with everything we're talking about is that there's been a very strong tendency to think that if something extraordinary happened, it must be only because God did it, and it must authenticate the religion of the person to whom it happened. But if you have the same sort of thing happening to different people in different religions, that just doesn't work. And especially if you have this happening in secular contexts. And I have a little file back in one of my rooms, just collections over the years of people thinking they levitated, a bunch of stories, and many of them don't have a religious context at all. They're just something that happened to a person once and never again, and that's it. So I am quite aware that many of my colleagues and fellow academics would think I've lost my mind here, but I think that the evidence for some levitation is really, really good. By the way, I should say I know two people who have claimed to see Roman Catholic priests levitate during Mass. They're both Protestants. They both didn't know neither one knew what to do with it. They were just in a church. One guy just thought, oh, that's very interesting. The other person just, well, what's this about?
Yes, greatly explained. We should not choose denomination or religion by watching those miracles or, yeah.
Well,
Okay.
so if you let me, I can just add at this point, I think that there are parts of the Bible that are fairly wise about this, because the Bible does not say if you do miracles, you are authenticated by God. You remember that Moses in the Exodus does some miracles, and Pharaoh's magicians can keep up for a little while. They could do some of the things that Moses does. And in the New Testament, the Antichrist can do miracles. And Matthew 7 talks about people who do wonders, but Jesus doesn't know them. So there is no direct correlation between even in the Bible, between the ability to do something and your spiritual or moral character.
I agree. Thank you so much. Now, in several traditions, including Christianity, Buddhism, so we hear about figures who reportedly radiated light, maybe from Jesus or someone.
Uh-huh.
So we have transfiguration into light among the monks or other people.
Uh-huh.
So what do you think about those?
So this was very interesting. Now, I just said I know two people who have stories about seeing somebody levitate. I know two people who claim to have seen people glow. So one was a Sufi, a friend of mine, who claimed that in a one-on-one audience in a hotel room, his Sufi master began to glow and the light filled the room, and then it went back down, and then the interview was over. Now, more interesting to me, because I've been able to quiz him about it, was an event that happened with my own son not too long ago. I think this was 2019, right before COVID. But he had an audience with a Tibetan holy man, somebody who was, I think, in his 90s at the time and very revered. And my son and three other people had an audience with him, and there was a Tibetan translator there. And my son says that during the interview, this man began to glow. And my son, who is not credulous, looked around and said, "What is causing this? Is it a light coming through the window? Is it some kind of reflection? What is going on here?" And he decided, after looking around and thinking about this, yeah, this guy's actually glowing. Now, he talked to the other people afterwards, and they all said, yeah, this guy glowed. Now, does that prove that Buddhism is true? I don't think so. But there's something I have discovered here in collecting stories over the years. So accounts of levitation can be found in secular contexts, but stories of people glowing only occur, to my knowledge so far, in religious contexts. And they always occur in connection with people who are revered or honored or thought to be particularly spiritual or religious. What's going on here? Again, I don't know. I don't think I want to say that if you glow, it means God is on your side doctrinally, because again, I think people from different religious traditions have glowed. The two stories I have aren't about Christians glowing, they're about a Sufi and a Buddhist glowing, right? So I know, first of all, I know that some of these stories are firsthand. Beyond that, I'm quite open to the possibility that something extraordinary is going on. Going back to Teresa of Avila, not only did people interviewed for her canonization process talk about her levitation, they also talked about her glowing. So this seems to be maybe not par for the saintly course, but it's not that rare.
All right, this is connected to that miracle. What about rainbow bodies among the also Buddhist tradition?
Oh my. Well, so this is the tradition that when a spiritual master um, dies and the body is left in state behind a curtain or in a little room, the body will shrink. And some bodies shrink part way, some shrink entirely and disappear, some leave hair and fingernails. Well, uh, I don't know any Tibetan languages, but I have talked to, I don't know, maybe the world's leading expert on this. I had an interview with him 2 or 3 weeks ago, actually. Um, I think that we should have an open mind. Some of the stories are recent. Some of them seem to come from or be associated with firsthand witnesses. Uh, I wouldn't bet the house on this one. So I'm more cautious about this, but I do think that if Christians can ask non-Christians to be open about the resurrection and consider the evidence and the sort of thing that the apologists say, that it should be turned around and Christians shouldn't just look at this and say it must all be legend without investigating. I'm all for looking into this business. Now, there are actually on the internet some pictures of people that appear to be shrunken, but to my knowledge, none of these have ever been investigated. I don't know to what extent Tibetan Buddhists will ever want people to come in and look at any of this stuff. But it's the stories are fascinating, and it's an ongoing phenomenon. That is, it doesn't just belong in the legendary past. These are stories from the beginning of the 21st century and the last half of the 20th century. There are a number of these. But I've been taken to task by people for even having an open mind on this, because I should know better, I guess. But look, once you open your mind to one or two things, then you're no longer a dogmatic skeptic, and then it just becomes a sort of empirical task. I don't have the empirical abilities to go to Tibet and make up my own mind and investigate everybody. But for me, these are just empirical questions that should be examined by open-minded people.
Thank you, Dr. Allison. That was enlightening, literally and figuratively. So I just wonder, what do you think about the book of Dr. Craig Keener about miracles that he documented? Maybe you read it.
I have that book. I can see it. It's on the shelf over there right now. So yes, I have the book. So I think that he is overwhelmingly and obviously right about the fact that miracle stories can come from eyewitnesses. So he's making that point again and again and again, because there's been a tendency within New Testament scholarship to say, well, if we have a miracle story, it must be late and legendary. It couldn't belong to the originating tradition. But that's a mistaken presupposition. So he's right beyond doubt regarding that. Now, the question becomes, beyond that, are any of these eyewitnesses reporting miracles? Are they to be believed? Are they all deluded? To what extent are some of these psychosomatic, exaggerated in the telling, misperceived, and so on? Those are different questions. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I agree with him, because I agree that the world is a weird place, and that seemingly metanormal or supernatural things do happen to people.
Okay, so we have miracles in a Christian worldview, Buddhism, but what about Islamic world and Hinduism? Do we have miracles among those people?
So every religious tradition, or at least major religious tradition that I know anything about, does have miracles. Most traditions also have some doubt here or there about what's going on, but there's a strong tendency almost everywhere to associate miracles with the vindication of the tradition in which they occur. So Catholics have often said, we have the best miracles, or we have the most miracles, or ours are the best attested, so Catholicism is true. But Sufis have lots of miracle stories. Sufis are full of amazing tales and stories. And same thing is true with Hinduism, and in modern India, you still have people like Sai Baba, the more recent one, all sorts of incredible stories. I don't, from what I've read, I have serious doubts about Sai Baba's moral character. I think he may have done some things he shouldn't do, and he may have been done a trick here or there, but there are some things that he supposedly did that, if happened as described, do leave you scratching your head. But the point is, over there in India today, we have tons of people who would tell you they saw Sai Baba do this or that, or their mother or sister or whatever was there when he did something. So miracles aren't unique to the Christian tradition, and eyewitness testimony to miracles isn't unique to Christianity. In fact, uh, one of the ways I would differ from Craig Keener is that, as he recognizes himself, his book on miracles is primarily about Christian stories today. And I am very interested in widening that and looking at everybody's miracles and seeing what we might conclude from that. But to go back to the very beginning with him, that book does make its main point, which is eyewitnesses can testify to amazing things.
Can we talk about Sai Baba more? Because there is a claim that he can do materialization. Even we have some videos. So do you believe that?
Yeah, so I've seen some videos where he produces ash. I don't find those very convincing. What I'm more interested in are the stories that back in the day he had these large sleeves and that people could ask for a particular type of food or fruit and that he could produce it. Now, those stories are very strange because occasionally people would say you could produce a fruit that was out of season, or he would produce something that he couldn't have predicted, that his sleeves weren't big enough to have 40 entrees, so that he would just have available whatever the person asked for. So those stories are very strange. And what makes me think twice about them is that people have interviewed people who used to work with him, who used to be his handlers, who used to be his assistants, and they've asked, how did he do his tricks? And even when the people became disillusioned with him or didn't believe in his spirituality anymore, they would say, well, I don't know how he did this or that. I didn't help him plant things. I'm as baffled as you are as to how he did things. So maybe I have an open mind there. I also remember that there was a famous magician who was interviewed in the 70s or 80s, a magician called Doug Henning, who was big at the time, and people gave him some reports of what Sai Baba supposedly did. And he did say, in a book I read, he did say, if these accounts are correct, I don't know how to do them as tricks. So you have a famous magician here saying, you know, if this is as described, then I'm baffled. So that again makes me think twice. But look, I want to go back to the point here. I'm all about investigating this empirically. I don't think that anybody's theology should hinge upon whether this guy ever did anything extraordinary or not. And so I can just look into this and wonder, maybe he did.
Yes, and the thing I like in your approach is when you say something strange happened or we don't know or something like that, because you don't say God did that or something. So that's a more historic approach. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I began by saying that I approach Zeitoun as an historian. I think there's a place for doing theology, but I want to look at these things empirically first. And I don't want to be fooled, and I want to be critical, and I want to be able to say, well, I don't know about that, or that's a fraud, but I think this probably happened. And I need to do all of those things as open-mindedly as possible and not being, I don't want to be driven by a theology which says, oh, I don't want Sai Baba to have done anything amazing, and I don't want any Sufis to have done anything amazing. Uh, I'm just allergic to that sort of approach.
Do you have any more examples of appearances of Mary? Because can we identify that Mary as a person appears sometimes, or is it just interpretation of people?
So I don't know how to answer that question. I don't have much confidence in what's going on in Medjugorje today. That's a famous place of pilgrimage. Uh, but I'm not an expert on this. So I have spent some time looking into Fatima, and I have spent some time uh, looking into Zeitoun. And I've spent a little time looking at the other famous apparitions, but not in any sort of depth. And so I wouldn't want to I wouldn't want to say much about them. So sorry to be frustrating, but I don't want to pretend to knowledge that I don't have. And so I've read enough and talked to enough people about Zeitoun that I think I have some sense of it. But if we go back to the 19th century or a couple of really interesting 20th century appearances in South America, I've read enough to say, well, that's interesting, and then no more.
Okay, thank you. I wonder, what is your thought about transubstantiation? How you say in Holy Mass, we have some accounts that people felt real taste of flesh and blood of Jesus or
Oh,
something.
those, well, so I I'm not sure that those stories rightly interpret the doctrine of transubstantiation, but those stories are there. But I've never studied them in great depth. I have some book on miracles surrounding Holy Communion, but other than just reading through those stories quickly, I can't tell you anything about it. I've never read it. I would guess that here a skeptic would just say this is easily explained in terms of expectation. Uh, but again, I'm not going to talk about something I know very little about. If I read one book on the subject, I'm not going to say much, okay? Because that means I don't know much.
Yeah, that's really honest. So thank you for this. And last, I want to ask you about is healings in monasteries. In my place, Serbia, we have Orthodox
Huh?
churches, and yeah, so many accounts of that.
Well, look, so I think that uh, miraculous healings uh, do take place, by which I mean there are people who are healed in ways that make no sense to medicine as we understand it today. Now, that's different from um, the usual psychosomatic story. So we know that the mind is very um, effective and that placebos can work and nocebos can work. Uh, but I think if you go through, let's say, the annals of Lourdes, the healings at Lourdes, some of them are genuinely baffling, where people with giant ulcers and near death seem to recover in a few hours. Um, there are also stories that take place outside of Roman Catholic contexts of people being healed quickly or miraculously in ways that don't make sense. Some people have studied these not from a theological point of view, but just from a medical point of view. I have a whole book, which is not a religious or theological book at all, which is a collection of stories uh, documented stories of people um, recovering from things they shouldn't have recovered from. So the authors of this don't speak of God or a miracle. They speak of spontaneous remission, right? So that's their secular term for this. But they have cases to talk about. So the cases are there. Um, but there is a theological problem here because most people in most times and places when they are sick will pray to God or their gods or whoever it is that they think is out there. It's very well, I think it's maybe impossible. I don't see how it could be done to have a sort of test group. So you have a bunch of people who are sick over here, and you have a bunch of people over here that have the same illness, right? 100 people with, I don't know, lung cancer, 100 people with lung cancer. And then we have these people prayed for, and we look at the rate of recovery and say it's better over here than over here. The problem with that is that in our society, these people who might not be be the object of prayer by whoever the scientists are appointing to pray. Their family and friends, they themselves are going to be praying. Everybody's prayer is going on everywhere for people. So the only way to work this out, I think, would be to have a couple of groups where one group is just a bunch of lonely atheists, right? And so they're not praying for themselves. Nobody else is praying for them. And then we have people over here. But the lonely atheists are going to do worse just by by thinking there is no God and everything's, there's nobody out there to help them and so on. Anyway, I don't see how you get to this to prove anything statistically. Everybody's always praying for people. But having said all that, yes, there are stories that don't make sense to us of cancers disappearing overnight, that sort of things being healed. However, there are limitations to this, however you explain it. I forget who it was who said, but if you go to Lourdes, who was it who said this? When you go to Lourdes, you will see lots of crutches, but you won't see any artificial legs. By which he meant, yeah, people could throw away their crutches, but they couldn't grow new limbs. That is, if they had, a false leg, they didn't throw it away because they had grown another one. So you would think that God wouldn't have any limitations, right? Couldn't God grow a new leg? But as far as I know, that's not attested.
Yes, I often hear from atheists as a counter-argument to those who give example of miracles. They would say there are a lot of weird healings when people don't pray to God, but they experience that. But is that a good argument? Because maybe God is still working among those people, even if they don't pray. What do you think?
So it's not a good argument from a Christian point of view, but it is a good argument from an atheist point of view. So I don't know what else to say. Uh, uh, my point here would be before we become philosophical or theological, we just need to be empirical and we need to look and see whether there are things that make no sense to contemporary medicine. And I believe that when you do that, they are there. They're not that common, but they are well attested.
All right, thank you, Dr. Allison. And when Bart Ehrman say that Jesus' group appearances are not strong evidence because we have many documented group appearances in history, is he right to use his argument to suggest that Jesus' appearances did not happen based on what we have, for example, in 1 Corinthians 15 or other?
So I'm not for or against that. What I believe is that some group appearances are veridical and some are not. So when you have my point of view, you can't just go back to the New Testament and say, oh, well, it proves this or it proves that. In my book, my most recent book on the resurrection, I gave some examples of collective apparitions. They exist in the literature. Actually, it's really interesting. One of the most important books on apparitions ever written in the 40s or 50s concluded that, I can't remember what the number was, but it was a really high number of the stories came from more than one person. That is, two people or three people had seen the same dead individual at the same time. So what Bart may be working with, I don't know. He might be working with a presupposition that all visions are hallucinatory. I don't work with that vision, with that idea. I believe that some visionary experiences actually are responses to incoming data, and that collective experiences aren't that common. So if you have my point of view, you can't go to the New Testament and say, aha, this happened, or aha, it didn't happen. What you end up with was the argument against it isn't conclusive, it's inconclusive. So, but that's my problem in general. So on the resurrection, I'm not a skeptic, but I'm not an apologist. I think the data is malleable enough that you can work it from more than one point of view.
Yes, I need to repeat. I just love your approach. That's the best. I really enjoy. So Any conclusion, Dr. Allison, about those topics? What would you suggest to people or give advice to people who want to study miracles? And
Oh
yeah.
my goodness. Uh, well, I can recommend Craig Keener's 2 volumes and also his little book. I also think that a little book I wrote is relevant to this issue. I wrote a book called Encountering Mystery, Religious Experience in a Secular Age, and I think there are things in there that are relevant to the topic. But having said that, um, I'm not happy with most of the literature because most of the literature either takes a partisan theological point of view or it's skeptical. And I think we need more voices doing something else.
Dr. Allison, this has been an incredible, rich, and wide-ranging conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to explore these profound topics with us. To all our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Follow us and subscribe. So until next time, stay curious, stay humble, and keep searching for truth. Goodbye.